The sun blazed mercilessly over the Arizona desert as Jake Morrison rode his horse along the dusty trail. His weathered face showed the marks of 32 years spent under the harsh western sun. The leather reins felt familiar in his calloused hands, and his blue eyes scanned the horizon with the practiced alertness of a man who had learned to survive in dangerous territory. Jake owned a modest cattle ranch about 20 miles south of Tucson. He had inherited the land from his father, who had died fighting Apache raiders 5 years earlier. The memory still burned in Jake's chest like a hot coal. He had sworn on his father's grave that he would never let the Apache take anything else from him. On this particular morning, Jake was tracking 3 missing cattle that had wandered away from his herd during the night. The tracks led him deeper into the desert than he usually ventured, toward the foothills where Apache war parties were known to camp. His Winchester rifle rested across his saddle, loaded and ready. The trail wound between tall red rocks and scattered mesquite bushes. Jake's horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Thunder, picked his way carefully over the rocky ground. The only sounds were the clip-clop of hooves and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. As Jake rounded a large boulder, he suddenly pulled Thunder to a halt. There, in a small clearing ahead, he saw his 3 missing cattle grazing peacefully near a natural spring, but that was not what made his heart race. Sitting beside the spring were 2 young Apache women, apparently filling water containers. Jake's first instinct was to reach for his rifle. These could be scouts for a war party, or they might be gathering information about his ranch. But something made him pause. The women appeared to be alone, with no horses or weapons visible. They looked to be in their late teens or early 20s, wearing traditional Apache clothing decorated with intricate beadwork. The taller of the 2 women had long black hair braided with small shells and feathers. Her face was beautiful but serious, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The other woman was slightly shorter, with a rounder face and a more gentle expression. Both moved with the quiet grace that Jake had learned to associate with Apache people. Jake remained hidden behind the boulder, watching them. Part of him wanted to simply retrieve his cattle and leave without being seen, but another part of him was curious about what these women were doing so far from any known Apache settlement. They seemed completely at ease, as if they had been coming to this spring for a long time. The taller woman suddenly looked up, and her eyes met Jake's across the clearing. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she said something quietly to her companion, who also looked in Jake's direction. To Jake's surprise, neither woman seemed afraid. They simply watched him with calm, steady gazes. Jake found himself urging Thunder forward into the clearing. He kept his hands visible and made no move toward his rifle. When he was about 20 feet away, he stopped and removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I'm looking for my cattle." The taller woman stood gracefully and spoke in accented but clear English. "The spotted cow and 2 brown ones? They have been drinking here since sunrise." Jake was surprised by her command of his language. "Yes. Those are mine. I didn't know anyone else used this spring. My grandmother's grandmother brought her children here to drink," the woman replied. "We are Ayana and Senna." She touched her chest, then indicated her companion. "This place has always been shared with those who need water." Jake felt a strange sensation in his chest. These were supposed to be his enemies, the people who had killed his father and raided frontier settlements for generations. But looking at these 2 young women, he found it hard to see them as threats. They seemed more like travelers who had stopped to rest. "I'm Jake Morrison," he said, replacing his hat. "I have a ranch about 20 miles south of here." Ayana, the taller woman, nodded slowly. "We know of the Morrison Ranch. Your father was John Morrison, who built the house with the red roof." "You knew my father?" Jake asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his rifle. "We knew of him," Ayana said carefully. "In our village, we heard he was a fair man who did not shoot Apache on sight, unlike some others." This was not what Jake had expected to hear. He had always been told that the Apache saw all white settlers as enemies to be driven away or killed. "Your village? Where is that?" Senna, who had been silent until now, stood and spoke for the first time. "We cannot tell you that. But we can tell you that not all Apache want war. Some of us only want to live in peace and take care of our families. Jake studied their faces, looking for signs of deception. But he saw only honesty and a kind of sadness that he recognized. It was the same sadness he had carried since his father's death, the sadness of people who had lost too much to violence and hatred. "Why are you out here alone?" Jake asked. "Isn't it dangerous?" Ayanna and Senna exchanged a look. "We are gathering medicine plants for our grandmother, who is very old and sick," Ayanna explained. "The plants we need grow only in certain places, and this spring is one of them." Jake looked around the clearing and noticed for the first time that the women had been collecting various desert plants and roots. Their gathering baskets sat near the spring, half filled with what appeared to be medicinal herbs. "Your grandmother is a medicine woman?" Jake asked. "She is," Senna said with obvious pride. "She has helped many people, both Apache and Mexican. Once she even helped a white settler who was dying from snakebite." Jake felt something shifting inside him, like a wall beginning to crack. Everything he had been taught about Apache people was being challenged by this simple conversation. These were not bloodthirsty savages but young women caring for their sick grandmother. "How far do you have to travel to get home?" he asked. Ayanna hesitated. 2 days' walk through the mountains. "On foot? Where are your horses?" "We have no horses," Senna said quietly. "They were taken by soldiers 3 months ago, when they raided our camp." Jake felt a pang of sympathy. He could not imagine crossing the desert on foot, especially while carrying heavy baskets of plants. The thought of these 2 young women walking for days through dangerous territory troubled him in a way he did not fully understand. "That's a long, dangerous journey," he said. "We know the safe paths," Ayanna replied, "and we carry protection." She briefly lifted the edge of her deerskin dress to reveal a small knife strapped to her leg. Jake almost smiled at the fierce expression that crossed her face. These women might be unarmed by his standards, but they were clearly not helpless. Thunder whinnied and pawed the ground, reminding Jake of his original purpose. He looked at his 3 cattle, who were still grazing contentedly near the spring. He could easily round them up and drive them home, but something made him reluctant to leave. "The sun is getting high," he observed. "It will be very hot soon. Maybe you should rest here until evening before starting your journey." "We must go soon," Ayanna said. "Our grandmother needs the medicine, and our families will worry if we are gone too long." Jake found himself making a decision that surprised him. "I could give you a ride part way. My horse is strong enough to carry all of us for a few miles." Both women stared at him in obvious shock. Senna actually took a step backward. "You would do this?" Ayanna asked carefully. "A white rancher would help 2 Apache women?" "My father taught me to help people in need," Jake said, though he was not entirely sure why he was making this offer. "And you're right that he was fair. He always said that kindness was stronger than hatred." Ayanna and Senna spoke quietly to each other in their native language. Jake caught a few words that sounded like questions, but he could not understand their meaning. Finally, Ayanna turned back to him. "We accept your help, Jake Morrison, but only for a short distance. We do not want to bring trouble to you or to ourselves." Jake nodded and dismounted. He helped the women secure their gathering baskets to his saddle, then boosted each of them up onto Thunder's broad back. He took the reins and began walking, leading the horse toward the mountains where they had indicated their home lay. As they traveled, Jake found himself talking with the women about many things. Ayanna told him about the different plants they had gathered and what each was used for. Senna described their village and the daily life of their people. Jake shared stories about his ranch and the challenges of raising cattle in the desert. To his amazement, Jake discovered that he was enjoying their company. Both women were intelligent and had interesting perspectives on desert survival and the changing world around them. They asked thoughtful questions about his ranch and seemed genuinely curious about his way of life. After they had traveled for about an hour, Ayanna suddenly held up her hand for silence. All 3 of them listened intently. In the distance, they could hear the sound of horses approaching fast. "Soldiers," Senna whispered, fear clear in her voice. Jake's mind raced. If the cavalry found him with 2 Apache women, there would be serious trouble for all of them. The soldiers would assume he was either a traitor or a captive, and they would certainly arrest or kill Ayanna and Senna. "There's a cave behind those rocks," Ayanna said, pointing to a cluster of red sandstone formations. "We can hide there." Jake quickly led Thunder into the shelter of the rocks. The cave was small, but deep enough to conceal them and the horse. They pressed themselves against the back wall and waited in tense silence. The sound of hooves grew louder, and soon Jake could hear voices. Through a gap in the rocks, he saw 6 cavalry soldiers riding past. They were clearly searching for something or someone, stopping frequently to examine the ground for tracks. "Sergeant Mills is getting tired of chasing ghosts," one soldier complained loudly. "We've been out here for 3 days and haven't seen a single Apache." "Colonel's orders," another voice replied. "He wants this area swept clean before the supply train comes through next week." The soldiers paused near the spring where Jake had first encountered the women. Jake held his breath, hoping they would not notice the signs of recent activity there. "Looks like some cattle have been watering here," the sergeant said. "Probably strays from one of the ranches. Should we follow the tracks?" "No, we're looking for Apache, not lost cows. Let's head back toward the main trail." The sound of hooves faded as the patrol moved on. Jake, Ayanna, and Senna remained hidden for several more minutes before cautiously emerging from the cave. "That was close," Jake said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Too close," Ayanna agreed grimly. "The soldiers have been patrolling more often lately. It is becoming very dangerous for our people to travel." "Why are they increasing patrols?" Jake asked. Senna looked sad. "There was an incident 2 weeks ago. Some young warriors from a different band attacked a stagecoach. Now all Apache are being hunted, even those who had nothing to do with it." Jake felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, but this time it was directed at the injustice of the situation rather than at Apache people in general. These 2 women were clearly peaceful, yet they were being hunted like criminals because of the actions of others. "I need to get you safely away from here," he said. "Those soldiers might come back." Ayanna shook her head. "You have done enough, Jake Morrison. We can find our own way from here. You should return to your cattle and your ranch before someone notices you are missing." But Jake found that he was not ready to say goodbye. In the space of a few hours, these 2 women had changed something fundamental in his understanding of the world. He could not simply abandon them to face the dangers of the desert alone. "At least let me take you a little farther," he insisted. "I know some back trails that the soldiers don't patrol." After more discussion, the women agreed to continue with him for another few miles. They traveled through hidden canyons and along ridges that offered good views of the surrounding country. Jake was impressed by how well Ayanna and Senna knew the terrain, even though they were far from their home. As the afternoon wore on, they reached a high overlook that gave them a view of the distant mountains where the women's village was located. It was here that they finally had to part ways. "From here, we know the safe paths," Ayanna said as she and Senna dismounted. "Thank you for your kindness, Jake Morrison. We will not forget it." "Neither will I," Jake replied, and he meant it. "I hope your grandmother recovers." Senna smiled. "She will. She is very strong, and now she will have the medicine she needs." As the 2 women shouldered their baskets and prepared to leave, Ayanna turned back to Jake with a serious expression. "There is something you should know," she said. "My grandmother had a vision about you 3 days ago. She saw a white man with kind eyes who would help Apache people in their time of need. She said this man would be important for bringing peace between our peoples." Jake stared at her in surprise. "A vision? About me?" "She described you exactly, even the scar on your chin from a childhood accident," Ayanna said. "She told us we would meet you near the sacred spring, and that helping you would help all of us." Jake unconsciously touched the small scar that was barely visible beneath his beard. Very few people knew how he had gotten it. Falling from a tree when he was 7 years old. "How could she know that?" he asked. "My grandmother sees many things," Senna said simply. "She says the spirits sometimes speak to those who know how to listen." Ayanna reached into her basket and pulled out a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. "She told us to give you this when we met you." Jake unwrapped the object and found a beautifully carved piece of turquoise shaped like a thunderbird. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with tiny details that must have taken many hours to complete. "This is very valuable," he said. "I can't accept this." "You must," Ayanna said firmly. "It will protect you from harm and help you make wise decisions. But more importantly, it is a sign that you are welcome among our people." Jake stared at the carved bird, feeling its smooth weight in his palm. He had never owned anything made by Apache hands, and the beauty of the work moved him deeply. "Will I see you again?" he asked, looking up at both women. Ayanna and Senna exchanged another of their meaningful looks. "Perhaps," Ayanna said. "If my grandmother's vision is true, our paths will cross again soon." With that, the two women turned and began walking toward the distant mountains. Jake watched them until they disappeared among the rocks and scrub brush, then carefully wrapped the turquoise Thunderbird and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The ride back to his cattle and then home to his ranch gave Jake plenty of time to think about the day's events. Everything he thought he knew about Apache people had been challenged by his encounter with Ayanna and Senna. They were not the savage enemies he had been taught to fear, but intelligent, caring women with families and concerns much like his own. As he drove his 3 cattle homeward, Jake found himself wondering about their grandmother and her mysterious vision. How could an old Apache woman know about a white rancher she had never met? And what did it mean that he was supposed to help bring peace between their peoples? The sun was setting by the time Jake reached his ranch house. The familiar sight of the red roof and wooden corrals should have comforted him, but instead he felt restless and unsettled. The world seemed different somehow, larger and more complicated than it had been that morning. That night, Jake sat on his front porch and pulled out the turquoise Thunderbird. In the lamplight, the blue stone seemed to glow with an inner fire. He thought about Ayanna's serious dark eyes and Senna's gentle smile. He thought about their long walk through dangerous territory to gather medicine for their grandmother. Most of all, he thought about what Ayanna had said about bringing peace between their peoples. Jake had never considered himself a peacemaker. He was just a rancher trying to make a living and honor his father's memory. But something had definitely changed in him today. Something that made him see Apache people as individuals rather than faceless enemies. As he prepared for bed, Jake made a decision. He would learn more about the Apache people who lived in the nearby mountains. He would try to understand their way of life and their struggles, and if an opportunity ever arose to help them, he would take it. He had no way of knowing that this decision would soon put him at the center of events that would test his courage, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately change the course of many lives. The old Apache grandmother's vision was already beginning to come true, though Jake Morrison had no idea what lay ahead for him. The turquoise Thunderbird sat on his nightstand, seeming to watch over him as he slept. In his dreams, Jake saw 2 young Apache women walking through moonlit canyons, carrying medicine to heal their grandmother and hope for a better future between their peoples and his. 3 weeks passed before Jake saw Ayanna and Senna again. During those weeks, he found himself thinking about them constantly. He caught himself scanning the horizon whenever he rode out to check his cattle, hoping to catch a glimpse of 2 figures walking across the desert. The turquoise Thunderbird never left his shirt pocket, and he often found himself touching it absently while he worked. The second encounter happened on a day when everything seemed to go wrong from sunrise. Jake had discovered that someone had been stealing his cattle during the night. 7 head were missing, and the tracks led north toward the mountains. Angry and determined to recover his property, Jake had saddled Thunder and set out in pursuit. The trail was easy to follow at first. The thieves had made no effort to hide their tracks, which struck Jake as strange. Most cattle rustlers were more careful about covering their trail. As he followed the tracks deeper into the hills, Jake began to feel uneasy. Something about this situation did not feel right. The trail led him through a narrow canyon that he had never explored before. The walls rose high on both sides, blocking out most of the sun and creating an eerie twilight, even though it was only midday. Jake's hand rested on his rifle as Thunder picked his way carefully over the rocky ground. Suddenly, Thunder shied and whinnied in alarm. Jake looked up to see what had frightened his horse and felt his blood turn cold. Blocking the canyon ahead were 5 Apache warriors on horseback, armed with rifles and war paint on their faces. These were clearly not peaceful villagers like Ayanna and Senna. Jake's first instinct was to wheel Thunder around and ride hard for the canyon entrance. But when he glanced back, he saw that their escape route was now blocked by 3 more warriors. He was trapped. The leader of the Apache band was a fierce-looking man about Jake's age, with scars on his chest and arms that spoke of many battles. He rode forward until he was only a few yards from Jake. His rifle pointed directly at the white man's chest. "You are trespassing on Apache land, white man," the warrior said in heavily accented English. "Why do you follow our trail?" "Why?" Jake's mind raced. These must be the cattle thieves. But admitting that he was tracking them could be a death sentence. On the other hand, lying might be even more dangerous if they discovered the truth. "I'm looking for my missing cattle," Jake said, keeping his voice steady despite his fear. 7 head disappeared from my ranch last night." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "You accuse Apache of stealing your cattle?" "I'm following tracks that led me here," Jake replied carefully. "I don't know who took them." The leader said something in Apache to his companions. Several of them laughed, but not in a friendly way. Jake could feel the situation getting more dangerous by the moment. "My name is Nalnish," the leader said. "I am a war chief of the Chiricahua Apache. And you, white man, are going to die today for the crimes your people have committed against mine." Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the canyon. "I haven't committed any crimes against your people. Your soldiers killed my brother 2 months ago," Nalnish snarled. "They shot him down like a dog when he was trying to protect our village. All white men are guilty of such crimes." Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He thought of Ayanna and Senna, and their talk of wanting peace. He thought of the turquoise thunderbird in his pocket, and the old grandmother's vision. Somehow, he had to find a way to reach this angry warrior. "Not all white men are the same," Jake said. "Just as not all Apache are the same. Some of your people want peace." Nalnish raised his rifle. "Peace is a lie. There can be no peace while your people steal our land and kill our families." Jake closed his eyes, preparing for death. But instead of a gunshot, he heard a woman's voice calling out in Apache from somewhere above them. Everyone looked up to see Ayanna standing on a ledge about 20 feet up the canyon wall. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice carrying clearly through the narrow space. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear authority and urgency in her tone. Nalnish lowered his rifle and replied angrily in the same language. The conversation continued for several minutes, with other warriors occasionally joining in. Jake sat perfectly still on Thunder, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell Ayanna was weaving to save his life. Finally, Ayanna climbed down from the ledge with the fluid grace, Jake remembered. She walked directly to Nalnish and spoke to him in a quieter voice that Jake could not hear. The war chief listened with obvious reluctance, shaking his head several times. Then Senna appeared from behind a large boulder, carrying Jake's missing cattle ahead of her. All 7 head were there, apparently unharmed. Jake realized with a shock that the Apache had not stolen his cattle at all. They had rescued them. Ayanna turned to Jake. "Your cattle wandered into a coyote trap yesterday evening. They would have died if Nalnish and his warriors had not found them and driven them to safety." Jake stared at the war chief in amazement. "You saved my cattle?" Nalnish spoke grudgingly in English. "Killing animals for no reason is wrong. Even white man's animals deserve to live if they have done no harm." "But why did you make it look like they were stolen?" Jake asked. Senna stepped forward. "We were trying to decide what to do with them. Some of our people wanted to return them to you directly, but others feared you would bring soldiers to our village. Nalnish believed you would follow the trail," Ayanna added. "He wanted to see what kind of man you really are. Whether you would come alone or bring many armed men." Jake looked around at the warriors surrounding him. "And what did you decide?" "You came alone," Nalnish said simply. "And you spoke of peace instead of reaching for your weapon when you were outnumbered. These things tell us about your character." "Nal," Ayanna smiled at Jake. "Also, we told Nalnish about how you helped us 3 weeks ago. And we showed him the thunderbird that grandmother gave you." Jake's hand went automatically to his pocket. You told him about that? My grandmother is Nalnish's grandmother too, Senna explained. She is the medicine woman for our entire band. When we told her about meeting you, she said we must watch over you and help you when we could. Senna, Nalnish looked uncomfortable with this talk of protecting a white man, but he did not contradict Senna. Instead, he said, my grandmother's visions are always true. If she says you are important for our people's future, then I will not harm you today. Jake felt a wave of relief so strong it made him dizzy. Thank you, all of you. Do not thank us yet, Nalnish warned. There are others of my people who would not spare you. Vision or no vision. And there are white soldiers who would kill all of us if they knew we were here. As if summoned by his words, the sound of horses and shouting men echoed from the direction of the canyon entrance. Everyone froze, listening intently. Soldiers, one of Nalnish's warriors hissed. Many of them. They followed your trail, white man, Nalnish said accusingly. Jake shook his head. I told no one I was coming here. I swear it. Ayana climbed quickly back up to her lookout position and peered toward the canyon mouth. 8 soldiers, she called down. They have a tracker with them. Mexican tracker, another warrior added grimly. He is very good. He will find us soon. Nalnish made rapid decisions. Scatter. Take different paths out of the canyon. Meet at the old camp by nightfall. He turned to Jake. You will come with me. White man, if the soldiers find you with us, perhaps they will listen to reason instead of shooting first. Or perhaps they will shoot us all, another warrior muttered. Jake found himself riding beside Nalnish up a steep, narrow trail that led out the back of the canyon. Ayana and Senna went with them, while the other warriors took different escape routes. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for a horse. But Nalnish led them up with the confidence of someone who had used this route many times. Behind them, Jake could hear the soldiers entering the canyon. Their voices echoed off the walls as they discovered the signs of recent activity. He prayed they would not be able to follow the trail up the steep rocks. Who leads these soldiers? Nalnish asked as they climbed. Probably Captain Reynolds, Jake replied. He's in charge of frontier patrols around here. Reynolds, Nalnish spat. I know this name. He is the one who attacked our winter camp last year. He killed many women and children who had nothing to do with any raids. Jake felt sick hearing this. He had met Captain Reynolds several times and had always thought he seemed like a reasonable man. But Jake was beginning to understand that there was much about the conflict between Apache and whites that he had never known. They reached the top of the canyon wall and paused to catch their breath. From their vantage point, they could see the soldiers below, still searching for signs of which way the Apache had gone. Why did you really save my cattle? Jake asked Nalnish quietly. The war chief was silent for a long moment. Then he said, because my grandmother told us that helping you would help our people. I do not fully understand her vision, but I have learned to trust her wisdom. What did she see exactly? Ayana answered. She saw a time when Apache and white people would fight together against a common enemy. She saw you leading both Apache and white warriors in a great battle that would decide the fate of our land. Jake stared at her. That's impossible. I'm just a rancher. I'm not a leader of anything. Grandmother's visions are not always easy to understand, Senna said. Sometimes they show things that will happen far in the future. Sometimes they show what could happen if people make the right choices. Nalnish stood up abruptly. The soldiers are leaving the canyon. They could not find our trail, but they will be back with more men and better trackers. Where will you go? Jake asked. Somewhere safe, Nalnish replied. And you, white man? Will you report what you have seen here today? Jake considered this question carefully. He could tell Captain Reynolds about this meeting, which might lead to the capture or killing of Nalnish and his warriors. Or he could keep silent and risk being seen as a traitor by his own people. I see no reason to report anything, Jake said finally. You saved my cattle and spared my life. As far as I know, no crime was committed here today. Nalnish studied Jake's face intently. You would protect Apache warriors from your own soldiers? I would protect people who showed me kindness, Jake replied. Apache or white, it makes no difference. For the first time, Nalnish smiled. It transformed his fierce face completely, making him look younger and less intimidating. Perhaps my grandmother's vision will come true after all. As they prepared to part ways again, Ayana approached Jake. There is something else grandmother wants you to know. She says there is a great danger coming to all people in this territory, both Apache and white. Soldiers from far away will come with orders to remove all Apache to a distant reservation. Many will die if this happens. When? Jake asked. Soon, perhaps in 1 moon, perhaps 2. She sees wagons and chains and much death. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Is there anything that can be done to stop it? That is what her vision was about, Senna said. She saw that if Apache and whites worked together, they might find another way. A way that would let our people stay on the land that has been ours for countless generations. Nalnish looked skeptical. How could whites help us against their own army? I don't know, Jake admitted. But if your grandmother is right about the danger, then maybe we should try to figure out how to work together. You would risk your life to help Apache people? Nalnish asked bluntly. Jake thought about everything that had happened since he first met Ayana and Senna at the sacred spring. He thought about their kindness, their intelligence, and their obvious love for their families and their land. He thought about the injustice of forcing an entire people from their ancestral home. Yes, he said simply. I would. Nalnish extended his hand to Jake in the white man's fashion. Then perhaps we should talk more about this. Will you meet with our council of elders? Jake shook the warrior's hand firmly. When and where? 2 days from now, when the moon is dark. There is a place where 3 canyons come together, about 10 miles north of here. Do you know it? I can find it. Come alone, Nalnish warned. And tell no one where you are going. There are those among my people who still do not trust any white man. Vision. Or no vision. I understand. As Jake rode Thunder down from the canyon rim toward his ranch, his mind was spinning with everything that had happened. In the space of a single day, he had gone from tracking cattle thieves to planning secret meetings with Apache war chiefs. The turquoise Thunderbird seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest. That night, Jake sat on his porch again and watched the stars appear in the desert sky. Somewhere out there, Ayana and Senna were probably helping their grandmother prepare medicine for sick people. Nalnish and his warriors were planning how to protect their families from the soldiers who hunted them. And somewhere in a government office far away, officials were probably drawing up orders that would change the lives of everyone in this territory forever. Jake had never felt the weight of approaching events so clearly before. The old Apache woman's vision was starting to make sense to him. 2 days. In 2 days, he would ride out to meet with Apache leaders and try to find a way to prevent a tragedy that seemed all but inevitable. Jake Morrison, who had never wanted to be anything more than a successful rancher, was about to become something he had never imagined. A bridge between 2 peoples who had been enemies for generations. The moon set behind the mountains, leaving the desert in complete darkness. But Jake felt no fear of what lay ahead. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The Thunderbird in his pocket seemed to approve. The meeting place was a hidden valley where 3 narrow canyons joined together like the fingers of a giant hand. Jake arrived just as the last light was fading from the western sky, following directions that Ayana had quietly given him when they parted ways at the canyon rim. He had never seen this place before, despite having lived in the area for most of his life. As he rode Thunder into the valley, Jake was amazed by what he saw. A small stream ran through the center of the space, fed by springs in the canyon walls. Ancient cottonwood trees provided shade and shelter. Most surprising of all, there were clear signs that people had lived here for a very long time. Petroglyphs covered many of the rock walls, showing hunters and animals and mysterious symbols that must have been sacred to the Apache people. Nalnish emerged from the shadows beneath the trees, accompanied by several other Apache men and women that Jake had not met before. In the center of the group was a very old woman, bent with age, but with eyes that seemed to see everything. Jake knew immediately that this was the grandmother whose visions had set all these events in motion. Jake dismounted and removed his hat respectfully. The grandmother studied him carefully for a long moment, then nodded to herself as if confirming something she already knew. "You are Jake Morrison," she said in clear English. "I am called Grandmother Spider by my people, though my birth name is Itzel. I have been waiting many years to meet you." "Many years?" Jake asked in surprise. "But your granddaughter said you only had the vision about me 3 weeks ago." Grandmother Spider smiled. "I have been having visions about a blue-eyed white man who would help my people since I was younger than Ayana is now. I simply did not know when you would appear or what name you would carry." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "How is that possible?" "The spirits speak to those who listen," the old woman replied. "And they have been very concerned about what they see coming to this land." Nailnish gestured for everyone to sit around a small fire that had been built near the stream. In addition to the war chief and Grandmother Spider, there were 2 other Apache men who appeared to be tribal elders. A middle-aged woman who Jake guessed might be another medicine person, and Ayana and Senna. "Tell him what you have learned," Nailnish said to one of the elders. The man spoke in heavily accented English. "I am called Broken Arrow. Yesterday I returned from Fort Apache, where I have friends among the Apache scouts who work for the army. They told me that many soldiers are coming from the east, 2 full companies of cavalry, with orders to round up all Apache in this territory and take them to a reservation in New Mexico." Jake felt his stomach drop. "How many soldiers is that?" "Nearly 200 men," Broken Arrow replied grimly. "They will arrive in less than 2 weeks, and they have been given permission to use any means necessary to accomplish their mission." "Any means necessary," Grandmother Spider repeated softly. "That means they will kill anyone who resists being taken from their homeland." "How many Apache are there in these mountains?" Jake asked. 4 bands, Nailnish answered. "About 300 people in total, including many children and elders who cannot fight." The numbers made Jake's heart sink. 300 people, many of them non-combatants, against 200 trained soldiers. The outcome would be a massacre unless some other solution could be found. "What are your options?" Jake asked. The other elder, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I am White Eagle. We have discussed this at length. Some of our young warriors want to fight, but we cannot win such a battle. Others suggest that we should flee deeper into Mexico, but the Mexican army would hunt us there as well. And some think we should surrender and go to the reservation," added the middle-aged woman. "I am Bright Moon, a healer like Grandmother Spider. But we know that many Apache have died on the New Mexico reservation. The land there cannot support our people, and the government supplies are often late or spoiled." Grandmother Spider looked directly at Jake. "That is why my visions showed me that we would need help from a white man who understood justice. Someone who could speak to other whites and perhaps find a third path." Jake felt the weight of their expectations settling on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. "What kind of help do you think I could provide? I'm just one man, and not a particularly important one." Ayana leaned forward. "Grandmother's vision showed you leading both Apache and white fighters against a common enemy. Perhaps the enemy is not each other, but the injustice that would force our people from their homes. There are white men in this territory who do not support the government's policy," Nailnish added. "Ranchers and miners who have lived peacefully alongside Apache people for years. Some of them might be willing to help if they understood what was really happening." Jake considered this. He knew several ranchers who had never had trouble with local Apache bands. There were also miners and traders who had built good relationships with Apache people over the years. But convincing them to actively oppose the United States Army was another matter entirely. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Jake asked. Grandmother Spider answered. "In my vision, I saw you gathering white men who believe in justice. I saw Apache warriors fighting alongside these white men against soldiers who had forgotten their honor, but the vision was not clear about how this would happen or what the outcome would be. Visions show possibilities, not certainties," Bright Moon explained. "They show what could happen if people make brave choices and work together for what is right." White Eagle looked skeptical. "And if this plan fails? What then? We will have made enemies of both the army and any white civilians we asked for help. If we do nothing, we are doomed anyway, Nalnish said firmly. At least this gives us a chance to fight for something besides just our own lives. Jake stood up and walked to the stream, needing a moment to think. The water gurgled peacefully over the rocks, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate. This beautiful, hidden valley had been home to Apache people for generations. The thought of them being forced to leave it at gunpoint filled him with anger. When he turned back to the group, Jake's mind was made up. I'll help however I can, but I need to know exactly what you're hoping to accomplish. Grandmother Spider struggled to her feet, and Senna quickly moved to help support the old woman. Come with me, Jake Morrison. There is something you must see. She led him to a section of the canyon wall where the petroglyphs were particularly dense. Using a stick, she pointed to specific symbols and figures. This tells the story of a great battle fought in this valley long ago, she explained. My ancestors fought alongside Mexican soldiers against Apache raiders from a different tribe who were attacking villages and killing innocent people. Together, they drove away the raiders and brought peace to this land. Jake studied the ancient drawings. Even to his untrained eye, the story was clear. Warriors with different clothing and weapons, standing together against a common enemy. The spirits told my ancestors that this place would see such a battle again, Grandmother Spider continued. Not Apache against Apache this time, but all people of good hearts fighting against those who would bring injustice and death to the innocent. You think that time has come now? I know it has, the old woman said with absolute certainty. The question is whether there are enough good hearts left in this territory to make the prophecy come true. They returned to the fire, where the other Apache were waiting anxiously. Jake looked around at their faces, seeing hope and fear in equal measure. Here's what I think we should try, Jake said. I'll talk to the ranchers and miners I know who have had good relationships with Apache people. I'll explain what's really happening and ask them to meet with your leaders to discuss a peaceful solution. What kind of peaceful solution? Broken Arrow asked. Some kind of arrangement where your people could stay on their traditional lands without being forced to go to New Mexico, maybe a local reservation here in Arizona, or some kind of treaty that recognizes your right to live in certain areas. Nalnish shook his head. The army will never agree to anything like that. Their orders come from Washington, and they do not care about local arrangements. Then maybe we have to make them care, Jake said. If enough local white leaders support keeping Apache people here, it might force the government to reconsider. White Eagle looked doubtful. And if the government refuses to listen? Jake met his gaze steadily. Then we'll have to find another way to protect your people, even if it means standing between them and the army. The words hung in the air like smoke from the campfire. Everyone understood what Jake was suggesting. Armed resistance against the United States military. That would be war, Bright Moon said quietly. It's already war, Nalnish replied. The government declared war on us when they decided to drive us from our homes. The only question is whether we fight back or simply die quietly. Grandmother Spider raised her hand for silence. There is wisdom in both paths. We should try Jake's peaceful solution first. But we should also be prepared to fight if peace fails. How long do we have? Jake asked. The soldiers will arrive in 12 days, Broken Arrow replied. We would need to have any peaceful arrangement in place before then. 12 days. Jake's mind raced, calculating how much he could accomplish in such a short time. He would need to ride to several different ranches and mining camps, convince skeptical men to take risks for people they barely knew, and somehow arrange meetings between white civilians and Apache leaders. It seemed impossible. I'll need help, Jake said. Someone who can vouch for me with your people, and someone who knows which white men might be sympathetic. Ayanna and I can help with our people, Senna offered. We can visit the other bands and explain what we are trying to do. And I know some of the Mexican traders who work with both Apache and white communities, added Nalnish. They might be willing to carry messages or arrange meetings. Jake nodded. What about weapons? If we do end up having to fight, what do your people have? Some rifles, but not many, White Eagle admitted. Mostly traditional weapons. Bows. Lances. Knives. We are skilled fighters, But we cannot match the army's firepower. Some of the white men I know have good weapons, Jake said. And they know where to get more if needed. As the night wore on, they developed a detailed plan. Jake would spend the next week riding to ranches and mining operations throughout the territory, feeling out potential allies and explaining the situation. Ayanna and Senna would carry word to the other Apache bands, asking their leaders to send representatives to a larger council meeting. On the 7th day, if Jake had found enough support among the white community, they would hold a joint council with both Apache and white leaders. Together, they would try to come up with a proposal that might satisfy the government without forcing the Apache to leave their homeland. If that failed, or if Jake could not find enough white support, they would begin preparing for armed resistance. Weapons would be gathered, defensive positions chosen, and plans made for protecting Apache families during any fighting. One more thing, Grandmother Spider said as they prepared to leave. In my vision, I saw a signal that would tell us when the time for peace was over and the time for fighting had begun. What kind of signal? Jake asked. The old woman smiled mysteriously. You will know it when you see it, Jake Morrison. The spirits will make sure of that. As Jake rode Thunder back toward his ranch in the pre-dawn darkness, his mind was spinning with everything that needed to be done. The next week would be the most important of his life, and possibly of many other lives as well. The turquoise Thunderbird seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest, reminding him that he was not alone in this impossible task. Ancient spirits and an old woman's visions were guiding his path. But ultimately it would be up to him and the people he could convince to help him to determine whether peace or war would come to this beautiful, troubled land. 7 days to prevent a war. 7 days to find a way for Apache families to remain in their ancestral homeland. 7 days to prove that people of different races could work together for justice. As the sun rose behind him, Jake Morrison rode hard toward an uncertain future, carrying the hopes of 300 Apache people and the responsibility of preventing a tragedy that seemed almost inevitable. The old prophecy carved in stone was about to be tested. And Jake was beginning to understand that Grandmother Spider's vision was not just about Apache and white people working together. It was about him personally finding the courage to become the leader he never thought he could be. They're mine now, he whispered to himself as he thought about Ayanna, Senna, Grandmother Spider, and all the Apache families whose fate now rested partly in his hands. Not mine to own, but mine to protect. Mine to stand with. Mine to fight for, if necessary. The Thunderbird seemed to approve, and Jake kicked Thunder into a gallop toward whatever destiny awaited them all.